Greetings, people of Earth. I come in peace. Welcome to the 145th episode of the Ask Abhijit show. I hope you are all doing extremely well. Before we begin, let us see who all is there with us in the comments. In the live chat, I can see Opai, Mahendra, Surekha, Samarth, Sushant, Anisha, Rudra, Kapil, Samarth, Super Samosa, Ayan Singha, Abhishek, King, Salavara, Jeet, Krishna, Hindu Se Tavi Putra, Brijesh, Alok, Light Yagami, history exam tomorrow, all the best, sir. XKGB agent, Mayank Tripathi, Srihari Arun, Jenil, Librandu detector, Subroto Ghoshal, Chetan 100, Aditya, Manish, Azminor, Anish, the landmark, typical gamer, Parth, Prajwal, Suhani, Yum Thangnabi, Vasu, Illuminati Creek, the guy, Kapil Kaushik, Kapil Jain, Indian citizen, Samarpan Singh, C4D2 Suman, Saurabh, Reya, Nandan, Abhinav, Jitendra, Divya, Sailor says, Melvin, Cyber Geek, Technish, Rahul, Rishi, Sunaina, Aditya, Surekha, Dheeraj, another Dheeraj, Ayan, Jeet, Martian, Vault Gaming, Dude Sayan, Alpha, Manohar, Pranab, Akash Dikshit, Solo Bird OPT, Rohan, Bharati, Ashima, Skanda, Srihari Arun, Kapil, Mandar, and lots of other people. Shaheen, Suhani, Mazar, Aditya, Kapil, Aditi, Rhea, and lots of other people. Good evening, good day, all of you. So nice to see you all. So thank you so much for being on the show tonight. I can see some more. Bark, Lavad, Trupti, Kapil, and lots of other people. So, as you know, today I will take questions that you have asked in the comments. So let us begin. Let's see what questions we have. I'm sure there's a whole lot of questions. Let us see what we have. Let's begin with question number one. I think we will begin at the right place. You know, what's going on in the world right now? Closer to home. Here we are. Ankit says, I messaged the Israeli ambassador and thanked him for his stand on Twitter. And I think many like me did that. But then, but when I saw him tweeting a random troller message screenshot that somebody praised Hitler in his box, I mean, what was the point of doing that? Either he's naive or a very, very clever person. I lost all my respect for that man. They just want unconditional support from us unconditionally. Right. So what happened? Okay, so the Israeli ambassador. So we know what happened earlier this week. There was this person, Nadav Lapid, who said something extremely unfortunate. He was appointed the head of the jury of an international film festival in Goa, and he said that the Kashmir Files movie is all propaganda and so on and so forth, something very unnecessary and annoying. He said it in the presence of the Israeli ambassador and a very high-ranking Indian minister, Mr. Anurag Thakur, and so on. Then the Israeli ambassador to India went ahead and laid out a whole tweet thread in which he kind of called out the person who made these comments, the Israeli person who made the comments. And then yesterday or day before yesterday, the Israeli ambassador goes ahead and tweets something. He says that I'm receiving various kinds of threats or abusive messages in my Twitter DM box, direct messages, and he put one of the screenshots out there. So I'm going to put it on the screen, but be warned that it contains abusive language. I do not usually put abusive language on this show, but I'm going to do it, make an exception, because this is something that's already there in public, and I think you should know. So here's what the Israeli ambassador tweeted. Let me put that on the screen, right? 1 second. Give me a second. Where are we? All right. Okay, so this is Mr. Naor Gilon. He tweeted this December 3, 8 a.m., which is yesterday, 8 a.m. in the morning. He says, I just wanted to share one of a few DMs I got in this direction. According to this person's profile, the guy has a PhD. Interesting. Yeah, sure. And even though he doesn't deserve my protection, I have decided to delete his identifying information because I'm so virtuous and so much nicer than him. And then it says something about Hitler, and Hitler was a great person. So, some nonsense like that. Yeah, we don't know who tweeted this, who sent this message to Mr. Naor Gilon. There is no identifying information. Twitter is a global platform. It could be anybody from anywhere in the world. We don't know who did this, right? And yet this the Israeli ambassador went ahead and tweeted this. So he is saying that I am receiving abusive messages on Twitter, and the implication is that Indians are tweeting this at him, or Indians are messaging him like this. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing. So let me tell you first of all what he had tweeted earlier. So this was the open letter to Nadav Lapid following the criticism of Kashmir files, which we know about. Yes. So I had spoken about this yesterday in the Indian Interest podcast, last 24 hours before today. Yeah, before right now. And he calls out Nadav Lapid in this tweet thread, but he doesn't really make any major, he doesn't really support India's stand on Kashmir in this. Uh, he doesn't refute Nadav Lapid's claim that Kashmir Files is propaganda and so on and so forth. He's saying you should have been a better guest, but I'm not claiming that what you have said is wrong, and so on. Some of the things that Mr. Naor Gilon said in this tweet thread, and then he goes ahead and tweets this. So he's trying to shame India and Indians, saying that Indians tweet this sort of stuff. So we are victims and you guys are victimizing us. That's the kind of thing he's done. So I tweeted this in response. I said that India has proudly and magnanimously rescued and sheltered helpless Jews for 2,000 years with zero anti-Semitism. India never has had any record of anti-Semitism. India is the only culture that has sheltered Jews, rescued Jews, and never ever been anti-Semitic. India is the only culture, the only civilization that has done that. Yeah, a random anonymous screenshot means nothing and certainly does not represent India. And then I say that instead of diffusing tensions, you're raising the temperature, ambassador. Very disappointing, because that's precisely what he's doing. And then then I went ahead and tweeted some more. Israeli Ambassador Naor Gilon's tweet is an undiplomatic, unnecessary, and uncalled for. It is a deliberate provocation, an attempt to shame India and Indians. It hints at ulterior motives and a hidden agenda. And I went. So people have been tweeting at me, so I've been responding to them. So it's possible that Israel, as the vassal state, which we know it is the US's vassal state. So maybe the vassal state Israel is doing the overlord's bidding. The US is bidding. We know that the US has been forcing EU and NATO nations to act against their own national interests. We know what's happening since February. The Americans have been forcing Europe to act against their own national interests, arm twisting them, right? So it would not be surprising if the US is now arm twisting Israel into sabotaging its excellent relationship with India. It's very much possible. The Israelis have to do what the Americans tell them, especially in the field of foreign policy and geopolitics. Yes, the Israelis have no option. So yeah, it's possible. So then the last tweet is that earlier this week, Ambassador Naor Gilon called out Nadav Lapid for being a bad guest. Who's being a bad guest now? Who's being the bad guest now? Right? So that's the deal. That's what's happening. It looks like this ambassador, this person, Naor Gilon, is deliberately trying to raise tensions, raise the temperature, and create this atmosphere of hostility and being a victim, and Indians are victimizing us, that sort of thing, which is incredibly disappointing. That an ambassador would behave like this. An ambassador is a diplomat. Diplomats know how to behave in public, what things to say. Their statements are typically very diplomatic, and this is extremely unfortunate and disappointing what he has done. It is not this behavior is not the behavior of a friendly nation or a diplomat, right? So that's the situation that we are in right now. Now let's go ahead and see. I said that India has always rescued Jews, sheltered Jews, helpless Jews. Jews have a history of being helpless the past 2,000 plus years. Yeah, recently they have become less helpless because they have their own nation now, which was created for them by the British and the Americans, and as US vassals, they have been able to do very well. Yesterday I went ahead and said that I do have the greatest admiration and respect for what Israel as a nation has been able to achieve the past since 1947-48. Yes, I do respect what they have been able to achieve, and I do admire them for a lot of things. But the truth is that Israel is a US vassal state. Without the US's support, Israel would not have existed, would not have survived the 20th century, right? And India has never ever had a single record, a single instance of anti-Semitism. India has always sheltered Jews, the helpless Jews, right? Here's an example. This is from the Times of Israel. How the Indian Oscar Schindler took in 1,000 Polish children, Jewish children, during World War II. Yeah. Documentary Little Poland in India chronicles the selfless rescue of Jewish and Christian kids as India struggled for its own independence. So, even when India was struggling with foreign occupation, with the destruction of the Indian economy and the destruction of India and wholesale plunder of India by the British, even at that time, India was rescuing and sheltering helpless Jewish and Christian children. And who did that? It was the uh, Maharaja Digvijay Singh Ji Ranjit Singh Ji Jadeja, also known as Jam Sahib, right? He did this selflessly. He said that I am your father. These kids were all orphans. Yeah, they had lost their parents during the events of the Second World War. Mostly Polish kids, some of them Christian, many of them Jewish. Yes. So the Maharaja went ahead and in a princely state in Gujarat, and he decided to adopt these children for the time being and shelter them in India and look after them as long as the war unfolded. Yeah. And even today, some of those kids still survive, and they do remember this very fondly. And many of them were Jews. Yes, Jewish refugees. So this was in 1942, and so on. You can read this article. You can go ahead and read the article. Yes. Uh, so yeah, that's one example of how India has always been kind to the Jews, magnanimous to the Jews. How India has always sheltered the Jews, and so it is extremely disappointing that this person, the ambassador of Israel to India, goes ahead and makes this unsubstantiated allegation in an attempt to shame India and to shame in the Indian people, the great Indian people who have always been kind and magnanimous to the Jewish people and to the Israelis. Extremely disappointing. It hints at ulterior motives. It looks like somebody somewhere doesn't want India and Israel to have a good relationship. And so what are the possibilities? There are multiple possibilities as to which could possibly explain the behavior of this person. One possibility is that he has gone rogue and he wants to become a social media star, and he needs attention. So one of the ways of gaining attention is to engage in such stunts. That is one possibility. Yeah. The second possibility is that he has received directions to do this from up top, from his bosses. So who are his bosses? He reports to the Prime Minister of Israel or to the Foreign Minister of Israel. I mean, he reports to the Foreign Minister of Israel. Yeah. So whoever is the Foreign Minister of Israel is a very high ranking official in Israel, and the foreign minister would not come up with a foreign policy on his or her own. It would come at the direction of the Prime Minister of Israel, who currently I would believe is more or less is Benjamin Netanyahu, which is very surprising because Benjamin Netanyahu has a history of trying to ameliorate the relationship between India and Israel. He has been a very strong proponent of a better India-Israel and stronger India-Israel relationship. So yeah, so it's very strange, very perplexing. And the third possibility is that maybe it has come from somebody higher than Benjamin Netanyahu. Maybe it's come from somewhere else, from the overlord of Israel, which is the United States. And I have spoken about this in the past. Just a month or so ago, I spoke about this. And somebody had asked me a question. I remember, you can watch this video, that is there a possibility? Now, we know that the kind of relationship India and the US have now is not very good. India has steadfastly refused to toe the American line in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. India is pursuing an independent foreign policy based on its own national interest. The Americans are not happy about this. And we know that France is part of the EU, France is part of NATO. Essentially, France is a US vassal, whether they like it or not. It's the truth. And similarly, Israel is also a US vassal state. Yes. So is it possible? The question was that India and Israel relationship and the India-French relationship could change. And I believe I had said that yes, there is a strong possibility that things may not stay the same, and things may perhaps go kind of downhill to a certain extent. I had said this. And here we are, just a month later, we are seeing something like this happening. It's never happened before. India and Israel have had the warmest of relations. India and Israel have so much in common. Our national interests align. They converge to a significant extent. There is immense potential for more robust ties between India and Israel. There's immense potential for further cooperation and a strengthening of the India-Israel relationship in so many different fields, in agriculture, in technology, in IT, in space, in the military domain, in geostrategy. I spoke about these things yesterday. And despite that, despite the fact that there is so much potential for progress in India, in the India-Israel relationship, we are witnessing this sort of behavior from the Israeli ambassador. This essentially tells us that something is up. Something is up, something is fishy, and I wonder who is orchestrating all this. It doesn't make any sense for the Israelis to go ahead and sabotage their relationship with India. I would not say that the relationship has nosedived or anything, but the kind of tweet you see is not behoove. It doesn't behoove the ambassador of a friendly nation, of a nation that has a strong relationship with India. It is unbecoming of a person in that position. Yes. So yeah, this seems to hint that to the fact that things may not be completely all right. Yeah, I hope that it's just a flash in the pan, and I hope it's just a mistake by the ambassador. I hope he retracts this statement and deletes this tweet. I'm not even asking for an apology. He should just delete this tweet and move on as if nothing happened, and we will also move on as if nothing happened. But yeah, it's been 2 days. The tweet is still out there, and he's kind of unapologetic. So something is up. Something is up. So maybe I was right that the relationship between India and Israel, and the maybe some other relationship also may change in the coming days. That's where we are. So yeah, that's the deal right now, and we will keep an eye on this as we do. Next question. Okay, in the last episode, you said that the Israeli ambassador neither denied nor accepted Hindu genocide in Kashmir. How can he do that when the Indian government itself hasn't recognized the genocide till date? Isn't this how diplomacy works? Imagine if he had said that the genocide was true, and even the government of India would have gone against him. Holocaust is well recognized in the world, and is obviously in Israel. What are my thoughts? Well, you are right, sir. So I do not expect the ambassador of Israel to go ahead and assert that a genocide happened in Kashmir, or and so on and so forth. It's not his business to do that. Nobody has asked him to do that. Yeah, but he should not support a claim that the Kashmir Files is propaganda. Yeah, so he kind of called out that individual Nadav Lapid on that, but he did not refute Nadav Lapid's claim that the movie is propaganda. So yeah, so the entire tweet thread that he put out was very diplomatic. Yeah, and it kind of refused to take a stand, and kind of did not support India in a variety of ways, which I spoke about in detail yesterday. You can take a look at that. But your larger point is absolutely correct. India itself has not recognized the fact that what happened in Kashmir was a genocide. Yes, India itself has not recognized this, and it's a continuation of something that's happened over 1,000 years. I called it the millennium of humiliation. Right? India has suffered the worst genocide in human history in the past 1,000 years. I would say at least, I don't know, I think around 500 million or more than that Indians would have died over a period of nearly a millennium. Yeah, which includes the Turkic mediated genocide of India, and then the European Christian mediated, essentially British mediated genocide of India. The British killed at least 100 million Indians. At least 100 million Indians in just a few decades. Most likely they killed around 200 million Indians if you sum up, if you add up everything over 2 centuries. And the Turks, the Turkic invaders and occupiers of India over a period of 7 or 8 centuries would have killed, in my opinion, it's a guesstimate, they would have killed around 500 million Indians. I think I'm sure the number doesn't make any sense to you, but if you sit down quietly with your emotions on the side and try to think about it and try to calculate based on actual records, you will see that what I'm saying is very plausible. Yeah. So so the truth is that India has suffered the worst genocide in human history, and the Indian government doesn't recognize this. India's textbooks don't speak about it. India's historians stay far away from this topic. And since India itself hasn't recognized what it went through, why should we expect foreigners, outsiders, to care, to bother? So what Rahul is saying over here is 100% correct. Why should we expect the Israeli ambassador to recognize the fact of what happened in Kashmir, or what happened at any other place in India or any other period of time. It is for us to recognize this first. And I think it's because of political expediency that this has never been this that the politicians and the governments have always steered clear of this matter. Very sensitive issue, they call it. It will create communal tensions and all. I don't understand why it should create communal tensions. We're not talking about people today who did anything. The people, the citizens of India who live in India today have nothing to do with what happened over the past 1000 years. They are the what they say is that it will create communal tensions between Hindus and Muslims, because in some way you're accusing Muslims of doing something. Excuse me, today's Muslims have nothing to do with what happened in the past 1000 years. Today's Indian Muslims are in no way responsible whatsoever for what happened a thousand in the past 1000 years. The people, the individuals, the foreign occupiers and oppressors who conducted the genocide have nothing to do with India's Muslims. So that's the deal. But India itself refuses to recognize the fact. See, India is a very strange society. India's society suffers from two conditions, two psychological conditions. First, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. India society collectively suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. India society it has all these pathologies and problems, social problems, societal problems, all these tensions and divides within the society. And these are all the consequence of the oppression that we have suffered over the past 1000 years. India society has been distorted. All kinds of evil has crept in from outside. And that is a consequence of the past 1000 years of foreign occupation and the total destruction of India's society and culture and the way society had evolved over thousands of years to operate. Yeah. So that is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We are now no longer under foreign occupation, more or less, and yet we are suffering from the consequences. That's PTSD. So India's society suffers from PTSD. And the second thing India society suffers from is amnesia, no memory of what happened. Why? Because our history textbooks and our history teachers will not teach us what really happened. So today's kids grow up knowing nothing, and they see all these problems in society, so they blame themselves. They blame themselves and they blame their ancestors. That it's all because of our own fault. That's the problem. And who will resolve this? The Indian government, whom we elect and to whom we pay taxes. It's their duty, it's their job to do this, and they are not doing it. Since 2014, people have been saying that now it's time to do it, but no, they refuse to do it. So that is extremely disappointing. So what Rahul says is correct. Why should we expect foreigners who have nothing to do with us? Why should we expect them to recognize what happened in India? We have to recognize it first. Our government should do it first, and it's not done yet. So yeah, correct, absolutely correct. Kaushal says, is it true that Indian Jews who traveled to Israel during its reformation days and even later were highly marginalized and persecuted? Please throw some light on this matter. Interesting question you ask, my friend. Yes, interesting question. So Israel was recreated in 1947-48, around that time. Yes, yeah, there's a whole history behind that. If you want, one of these days I could talk about it. Yeah, it's an interesting story. The Jews have a roughly 3,000-year history, and their original homeland is what is the region that is now roughly the region that's currently Israel. A whole story in behind that. So Israel was created in 1947, 1948, around that time, yes. And then there was this concept of aliyah, that all Jews have the right of return to Israel. So no matter where you live in the world, if you are a Jewish person, you have the right to go and immigrate to Israel and live there. And the moment you reach there, the Israelis will give you certain things like money and some kind of job or whatever based on your qualifications and things like that, and try to integrate you into Israeli society. So if you are a Jewish person, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what the color of your skin is, doesn't matter. You have the right to go and live in Israel and become an Israeli citizen. Yeah. So many Indians. So India, like I said some time ago, a few minutes ago, has been sheltering helpless Jews who came to India for shelter for at least 2000 years. A whole bunch of Jews came to India, Yehudis came to India after the destruction of the Temple of Solomon at the hands of the Romans in around what year was it? Was it 82 AD? Don't hold me to that date. I think it was 82 AD or somewhere around there. Somewhere around that. If you are interested, look up the dates yourself. I don't memorize everything. So there was this entire persecution of the Jews by the Romans. The Romans had occupied the land. They were great conquerors. They conquered Judea, and many of these Jewish people were expelled out of Judea, and they were forced to settle in various other parts of the world, in Europe, in the Roman Empire. Some of them escaped and came to India. Yeah. So I think that's the first occasion in which you find Jewish refugees arriving in India, and India treated them with great, well, what shall we say, magnanimity, and gave them a place to stay in India, and did not force them to convert to any other religion and become whatever. You be you do what you want, and we will allow you to live there. India has always been like that. So these people have been the original Jews who came around that time have been living in India for around 2000 years. And then there were many other waves of refugees, Jewish refugees coming into India. And then later you had the Baghdadi Jews, the Sassoons, who were drug smugglers, etc., and all that. There's a whole different story, who also lived in India, and so on and so forth. Yes. So there have been various Jewish communities in various parts of India, in Malabar, down south, in Kerala, in the Mumbai region, and various other parts of India. Yeah, you can look up the history if you're interested. I'll not go into the details right now because that's not what we're talking about. So when Israel was recreated, uh, this opportunity arose for the Jewish people of India, to possibly migrate to Israel, because we know what happened to India. India was destroyed completely, thoroughly, by the British. India was a terrible place to live in. Complete poverty, destitution, and then you had the Nehruvian era in which there was no growth in India. India's incredible potential was stifled and suppressed. Yes, so it made sense for people to get out of India for a better future for themselves and their families and their children and their descendants. So many of the Indian Jews decided to move to Israel. Lots of Indian Jews, yeah. And then the question is, what happened to those people? Shall we take a look at that? Yeah. Let's put some of this interesting material on the screen. Let's do that. What happened to India's Jews? What happened to India's Jews who went to Israel? Right. So this is a BBC news article. Israel's Indian Jews and their lives in the quote unquote promised land. So let's see what it says here. Return to the promised land. The Bene Israeli population, it is thought to number around 80,000. They came from the western Indian state of Maharashtra. So around 80,000 Maharashtrian Jews went to Israel. Some of them migrated in the 50s and 60s. Before leaving India, they had ready to return to the promised land by being taught Hebrew and some Jewish prayers and all that. So they were hardly Jewish at all. They were all Indian. I mean, they even look Indian. There's no Israeli or Jewish appearance. Yeah, they look like Indians. So it did not go. The migration did not go as smoothly as hoped. Mr. Gudekar says that, like many others of his community, his family were discriminated against because of their darker skin color and because they could not speak fluent Hebrew. So today, the dominant Jewish people in Israel are the white, so-called white Jews. Yeah, the European origin Jews. There are two kinds of Jews. The Ashkenazi, there are many kinds of Jews, obviously. The Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. The Sephardim, I believe, are the brown-skinned original Jews. The original Jews were Middle Eastern people. They were brown-skinned people. They were not white people. Then a whole bunch of Jews were forced to migrate to the Roman Empire, to various parts of Europe. It's a whole story because of the Romans, and then because of the Ottomans, because of the during the Crusades and all that. and during the time of Salahuddin and so on and so forth, there were various waves of migrations. Yeah. So then these Jews who lived in Europe, they obviously intermingled with the locals over time, over centuries, and they acquired European appearance. So you will say that most of the prominent Jews in Israel are European origin Jews. Yeah. And then it's strange that despite the Jews originally being a brown skinned people, there is today discrimination against people, against Jews in Israel who are not white. So yeah, so there was discrimination. These people were allotted an inferior home built of asbestos and tin. Mr. Goodacre says his father often regretted leaving their life in India, but they had burned all their bridges with Mumbai. There is more. There is more. Other people also agree that the community faced discrimination as soon as they arrived in the country. Um, they were the dark. I don't think Israelis had seen Indians in the 1950s. They were the darkest group in Israel, which seems extraordinary today. Uh, Grocery shop owners would give them black bread, telling them it was for black people. Yes. um, the biggest crisis faced by the community was in 1962 when a rabbinic council decreed that the Bene Israelis, or Indian Jews, would have to have their maternal ancestry investigated if they wanted to marry Jews from other communities, which means that there was an attempt to prevent them from marrying with other Jews within Israel, in Israel, and something like that. And eventually, this thing. Eventually, they finally succeeded in seeing their demands fulfilled, and so on. So that's one example of what happened to the Indian origin Jews. There is this other article which is more recent. Indian Jews in Israel, it wasn't the promised land, it's behind a paywall. So let me go to this Twitter thread by Ruchir Sharma. 73 years ago, Israel made a promise to Indian Jews it did not keep. It invited them to return to the promised land, but went back on its word, sometimes with heart-wrenching consequences. Many Indian Jews packed up their lives and livelihoods and made the Aliyah, a religious phrase that describes moving to the land of Israel. They had no idea just how miserable they would be. The homes assigned to Indian Jews were tents, wooden huts, and tin houses, whereas European Jews were assigned more permanent structures, including apartments and even fully furnished villas. European Jews were put up in hotels until permanent accommodation could be allotted. The Jewish agency had promised education for children, but access to this too was given along the lines of race. Indian children were given a primary education, whereas European children received a university level education. Many Indian Jews had quit government jobs and shut their businesses to settle in Israel. But the new positions they were assigned were far inferior to what they enjoyed in India, and also far inferior to their qualifications. They were given temporary work at low salaries. In healthcare also, European Jews were given priority. They were given priority in the allotment of hospital rooms, even over extremely sick Indians. Sometimes non-European Jews were apparently turned away and told to return later when the patient needed more urgent care. One letter from an Indian Jew to the Israeli government said, promises were made to us by the Israeli authorities in India, by the Israeli authorities, that work will be given to us in Israel according to our profession. Very good education to our children and decent houses to stay. Therefore, we agreed to resign from our very long service jobs, our very good homes, and the education of our children to come to Israel and find out just the contrary of what was promised to us. And we are your victims by your false promises. We now appeal to all men with conscience and in fair name of humanity to raise their voices and ask why are the Sephardis, the brown-skinned Jews, and the Indians in particular, why are they treated like this? And human living, and what is our future? Is it only to fight wars for you all and nothing else? Right? One letter addressed to Prime Minister Nehru said, we beg and pray, Honorable Sir, God of peace and justice, to help your Indian children in distress and ask the merciless rulers of Israel to repatriate us back to our dear mother country, India. Long live India. When Indian Jews they asked for permission to conduct peaceful protests in Jerusalem, their request was denied. So they continued to write to the governments and prime ministers of both countries and to human rights groups, highlighting their plight and asking for relief and rescue. But this too posed a challenge. Indian Jews were questioned even about their complaints to human rights bodies and into the Indian government. The Israeli authorities had apparently threatened them with imprisonment if they continued to write these letters of complaint. Here's more. Israel gave birth control to Ethiopian Jews without their consent. That's called racism and that's called human rights abuses. Little hope of change for Israel's marginalized groups. Ethiopian Israeli protester is arrested in Jerusalem. You can check this out. More racism in Israel. The murder of a young Bnai Menashe immigrant. The Bnai Menashe are Northeast Indian Jews. They seem to believe that they are Jews. The Israelis have done various investigations, genetic investigations, tests, and all, and they've been able to find absolutely no Jewish or Hebrew, I mean, Jewish or Israeli ancestry. But they have agreed to give the so-called these Bnai Menashe people from Northeast India, essentially in Manipur and Nagaland, the Haukips, etc. The Israelis have decided to give them citizenship and then see how they are treated. For a Jewish teenager in Israel to beat, kick, and stab a fellow Jew to death because his facial features are viewed as being different, how is such a thing even possible? Well, it's possible if the person looks like a Northeast Indian person. So that's what Indian Jews are facing there. What is this? India's Jewish lost tribe faces hard times in Israel. You can read this as well. What they are facing, what they are going through. So the same racism, the same marginalization and discrimination. Bnai Menashe break silence to protest their subjugation to NGO controlling their aliyah. Immigrants from India call out Shavai Israel, which they say uses intimidation to silence detractors. The private organization denies the allegations, whatever. Dozens of members of the Bnai Menashe community gathered in Tel Aviv to protest what they described as their subjugation, and so on, addressing the racism that exists towards the Bnai Menashe community. These are Northeast Indians who believe that they are Jews, and so on. So this is just a sample, a small sample of what Indians face in Israel. Those Indians who have decided to migrate to Israel because they have apparently Jewish origin, and for a better future, because Israel is a first world country and with better access, better education, better lifestyle, better living standards, and so on. So that's the real reason why people move to another country. Yeah. So that's the kind of situation. These are the kind of problems and challenges that Indian origin Jews face in Israel to this day. It's not something that happened in the past. Racism, discrimination, not only Indian origin Jews, but African origin Jews, Ethiopian origin Jews, and even the Sephardim, the brown-skinned original Jews, even they face this discrimination from their fellow Jews, because the dominant ethnicity, the Jewish ethnicity, is the European Jews, the Ashkenazim. That's the truth. Yes. So yeah, that's the answer to your question. If you are all interested in knowing more, do read. It's all available online. All right. Okay, next question. Alka says Maldives and Australia denied participating in the Indian Ocean meet held by China. Major embarrassment for China. What do you think? Interesting. So yeah, what happened? I don't think it's a major embarrassment for China. I think it's a major embarrassment for who? I think it's a major embarrassment for the Indian media, because it's the Indian media that was reporting that that Maldives and Australia also participated in this event. For instance, let me show this. So this, I believe, is an article I had shared at the time, I think a week ago. It's by NDTV. Big surprise, yeah. And now they have edited the article. They have edited it. At that time, it was saying 21 countries or something. Now they've changed the headline to 19 countries, and they have removed the names of those two nations. No thanks. Maldives and Australia. At that time, they had reported that Maldives and Australia had participated. So I think it's a major embarrassment for the substandard journalists of India. I'm not saying all Indian journalists are substandard. There are some brilliant and really worthy journalists in India. But overall, the mainstream media is all, what the standards are like. So I think it's a major embarrassment for the Indian media houses and the journalists who reported this fiction that the Maldives and Australia had participated in this Indian Ocean meet thing by China. So yeah, it's a good thing. So the Maldives, as we know, until recently, until the past decade or so, the Maldives were strongly under China's influence. and now they have declined. It's emerged that they declined. They refused to participate in this meeting, which was held by China. Excellent, very good. In Australia, obviously, Australia is a nation that feels extremely threatened by China. Australia and China, the relationship has deteriorated greatly over the past few years. Australia is a member of the Quad, which is India and the US and two vassal states of the US. Yes, so so that is the situation. That's what's going on, and yeah, it's not very surprising that these two nations chose not to get involved in this Chinese-led initiative. So it's not a major embarrassment for China. The Chinese don't feel embarrassed about these things. Even I would not feel embarrassed if you invite 25 countries and 21 only or only 19 come. It's fine. It's their choice. It's not embarrassing. They'll keep trying. They'll keep pushing. That's the kind of nation China is, and that's the kind of objectives they have. Extremely, they are an expansionist, hegemonic, imperialistic nation, and we will have to stay on our toes and do everything in our power to push back against their expansionism. Yeah, right. So that's about that. So yeah, I thought I should take this up and clear, because at that time last week I had also said, because of the media reports, that the Maldives and Australia participated in that event. Well, it's not so, and good. Ramalakshmi says, what do you think of the 48,000-year-old frozen zombie virus in Siberia? Ooh, so scary. Scary. Viruses are intact until they are in host. So, do these viruses hold any threat if we are contaminated or exposed in any way? And Manish says, what's about this zombie virus that came in the news recently? Is that a threat for the human race? Will it be as catastrophic as we see in the movies? Ooh, I'm so scared. A zombie virus. As you all know, I have done a lot of podcasts with Ranveer and Avadia on the Ranveer show. Yeah, and I remember last year in one of the first podcasts I did with him, I said something which was rather unfortunate. I said that this could be the decade of the virus. When I did this podcast, India was still in under a situation of quasi lockdown situation. It was kind of iffy whether we should go out and travel or not. Yeah, so yeah, the virus was very much there. The pandemic was very much on at the time, and at that time we had this discussion, and I had said that this could actually be the decade of the virus. I so hope it's not the case. I so hope so. I so hope that this is not the decade of the virus. We've had enough of viruses. One was enough. We don't want more. And now we see this news. So what is the deal? What is this thing about? Let's put a news report on the screen. Zombie virus. Ooh, so scary. I don't like. Okay, let me put it on the screen. Okay, a few news reports about what's happened. Look at this. Fox News. Scientists revive 48,500-year-old zombie virus from Siberian permafrost. So, what's the permafrost? See, if you the permafrost region is that part of the ground that is permanently frozen. So, if you go to higher latitudes in the earth, near the Arctic Circle and all, in the Siberian region, etc., the ground is permanently frozen because it's so cold there. So that is called the permafrost. That region where the ground is permanently always frozen 12 months of the year. Even in summer, it doesn't thaw, it stays frozen. So that's the permafrost. But now, because of global warming, some of this permafrost is beginning to thaw. And then what happens is that the ice melts, the snow melts, and the ground unfreezes, it thaws, and whatever was trapped in the ground for thousands and thousands of years, it kind of gets untrapped, and it may get exposed to the atmosphere, and whatever is in there may make its way out into the world. So you will find perhaps carcasses, frozen carcasses of mammoths and other ice age animals. That's interesting. But you will also find viruses and bacteria and stuff like that, and other parasites. You may find some ancient plants coming back to life, possibly. But what really concerns us is that you may see ancient microorganisms uh, coming out into the open again. And the thing is, some microorganisms can stay dormant but alive for not just thousands of years but millions of years. Here's an example. Look at this. Bacteria. So this is a report from 2021, Scientific American. Bacteria in 100 million year old seafloor sediment have been resuscitated. These bacteria were entombed in the sediment under the sea. So it's essentially bacteria encased in rock. Essentially, that's what it is. And this sediment was 100 million years old. So this bacteria had been trapped inside for 100 million years. 100 million years. And these have been resuscitated. They have come back to life. And I have seen other reports as well, in which people drilled, hundreds of meters underground into the bedrock of the earth. They pulled out cores, samples of rock, which were like hundreds of meters underground. And this rock was obviously, it had been down there for hundreds of millions of years. And they found bacteria in there, and those bacteria they were able to reanimate those bacteria. So bacteria can remain dormant for hundreds of millions of years and not die. And that indicates that would tell us that it's possible to bring back very ancient bacteria back to life. Just imagine how scary that is. And similarly, viruses are, well, very strange creatures. They are, I mean, it's not sure how to classify them. They exhibit some characteristics of living beings, and they also exhibit some characteristics of non-living beings. So viruses are on the dividing line between life and between living beings and non-living beings. So viruses also can survive for a very long time. The only thing is that they have RNA and DNA and all that. Yeah, viruses. So yes, so now these scientists, whoever they are, have revived these ancient zombie viruses frozen for eons in Siberia. This is the actual scientific research paper. An update on eukaryotic viruses revived from ancient permafrost. Yeah. So yeah, that's what's happened. Very ancient viruses have been revived. Not just one, but multiple viruses. So yeah, we would call them zombie viruses and all that. So is this dangerous? Yes, of course, it is potentially dangerous. You see, we know less than 1% of all viruses. You take a spoonful or a glass full of seawater, it contains all kinds of unknown viruses that have never been classified, and viruses that have never been studied. So viruses are all around us. Most of the viruses, we don't even know what they are, and scientists have never even studied them. So viruses are all around us, microorganisms are all around us, bacteria are all around us, and so on and so forth. And we have evolved on this planet for millions of years, for billions of years. I mean, our ancestors were shrew-like creatures 66 million years ago, when the non-avian dinosaurs went kaboom. And even before that, our ancestors lived. So our origin goes back to the very first primal life on Earth, 3.77 billion years ago. So we have survived 3.77 billion years, at least, on the planet. And we have evolved in such a way that we know how to deal with these various viruses and bacteria. And yet some of them, if they have not been around for thousands of years, or maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, then they could pose a significant threat to us. I would not say that a new virus comes out and kills off all humanity, but yeah, it could cause a significant problem like what we have just experienced, and we don't want that. So I think that these frozen zombie viruses are very dangerous, potentially very dangerous, and these scientists who are studying them should exercise the utmost caution, please, for the sake of the gods. Please exercise as much caution as you can. We do not want a repeat of 2019, 2020, and so on. The Chinese are still struggling with that. We do not want any new virus. Please, for the sake of the gods, don't do that. All right. Purnima says, people like Ian Hancock talk about Egypt, Indonesia, Turkey, the mounds in America, etc., but never ever talk about Bharat. Why? Major biases against India. This is why I do not like Hancock and all these other stooges on programs like Gaia, etc. They all talk about the Incas, the Mayas, the Egypt, Gobekli Tepe, etc., but nothing about India. Crickets. Yeah, absolutely horrible and ridiculous. And I agree with Purnima. So I believe that Graham Hancock actually did visit India on a couple of occasions, if I'm not mistaken, many years ago, and it is likely that he even wrote about it in one of his books that was published early in the 21st century, 2002, 2003, or something long ago. I believe he had dived around the archaeological site of ancient Dwarka and all that a long time ago, once or twice. And at some point in time, he even wrote about it. But if you look at the latest TV series that he has come up with, Ancient Apocalypse, he doesn't refer to India at all. And he actually claims that Zoroastrianism is possibly the oldest religion in the world, which is actually laughable. Yes. So, yes, it is kind of strange and disappointing that Graham Hancock has this attitude. He was not always like this, but yes, he has chosen to disregard India. We know, I think everyone in the world knows that India is the oldest known civilization and also the oldest surviving civilization in the whole world. So, yeah, I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago as well. I'm sure I kind of reviewed very cursorily Graham Hancock's latest work, Ancient Apocalypse. So there is this pattern of behavior that you see among these researchers, uh, including Graham Hancock, of deliberately not speaking about India, of deliberately not telling the world about the truth about India or anything about India at all. Just don't speak about India. Speak about Egypt and speak about Mesopotamia and Gigantia in Malta. Speak about the Incas and the Aztecs in Quetzalcoatl and various other gods. Speak about Gudang Panag in Indonesia. Yeah, speak about Gobekli Tepe, other places, but just don't speak about India, which is, well, it obviously speaks about a certain bias that these people have. And the reason why, see, Graham Hancock is an important researcher. I don't agree with everything he says, but he does make some good points that, a lot of the mainstream interpretations are incredibly correct, are totally incorrect. I beg your pardon, totally incorrect. Um, there is a lot of groupthink in archaeology. There is a refusal to see facts and to interpret things properly, and so on and so forth. So that also applies to India. So certain things are true. Uh, he has been talking about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which kind of has a lot of evidence that supports it. Of late, a lot of evidence has emerged that does support what he has been talking about for a long time. So it's good to see that part of what he has been claiming vindicated. But there is a lot that he speaks about that doesn't make sense. First of all, he makes the claim over and over and over again that there was one single ancient highly technologically advanced civilization from which everything else emerged. He says that before the Younger Dryas impact, before the calamity at the end of the last ice age, there was, before that, a very highly technologically advanced civilization. That's what he says. It's possible, but the theory that he has put forth is, it's termed, the term that's used for it is hyper diffusionism. Which, what does it mean? What does this term mean? So hyperdiffusionism means that it is the claim that certain cultural traits, certain intellectual advancements, certain scientific advancements, and certain technologies originated in a single culturally and overall technologically advanced civilization, just one civilization. And then all these things, they spread to other cultures from this one civilization. This is called hyper diffusionism, and that is totally pseudo scientific. Where is your evidence that there was just one advanced civilization? Why not five advanced cultures or seven advanced cultures? Why just one? So that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There is zero evidence that supports this claim, and yet he keeps on repeating this claim over and over again. So there is a lot to admire about the guy, and there is a lot that the guy is completely wrong about, or at least it doesn't make any sense. There are so many leaps of imagination that are completely unsupported by data. And there is a very curious insistence on not speaking about India. You go across the globe. You go to Mexico, you go to South America, you go to the Caribbean, you go to Bimini, you go to Egypt, you go to Indonesia, you go to Malta, you go to Turkey, you go all across the world, but you refuse to go to India, which is known to be the most ancient civilization. So yeah, this smacks of bias. And so that's why what Purnima is saying is entirely correct. So so Graham Hancock is important. It is worthwhile to study his writings, his research, but it doesn't fill all the gaps. And I have not read all his books. Yeah, I just have one right now. It's about America. So that's something I still have to read. But yeah, so I think it's worthwhile to study his work and to read his work. But one has to be careful, because a lot of his assumptions are incorrect. A lot of his assumptions are something that comes out of his imagination, unsupported by data. But yeah, it's certainly worthwhile to study his work to fill in some of the gaps and some understanding that we may have. Okay, Saurabh says, did Harappans know how to perform brain as well as dental surgery? Some finding points out this consensus. All right, Harappans and surgery. We do know that the Harappans. I mean, look, the Harappans are not some extinct people. Yes. So when we talk about did Harappans do this or did Harappans do that, we are talking about our ancestors. The Harappans were not some people who disappeared. It was not some civilization that existed and it no longer exists. It is a continuation. We today are a continuation of the so-called Harappan or Indus Valley people, right? It is the same civilization. Today's India is a continuation of that civilization. So it was one phase, a specific phase of the 10,000 plus year old Indian civilization. That was the so called Harappan period. So the people of that time, the people, our ancestors who lived at that time, we know that they did perform various kinds of surgery. Let's see what kind of surgery they performed, shall we? Let me put something on the screen. Here we are. Excuse me. So, this is a news report. Dig uncovers ancient roots of dentistry, proving prehistoric man's ingenuity to blah 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 blah. So, researchers have found that dental drilling dates back 9,000 years. So, they talk about Pakistan, which is obviously temporarily the separate nation, but it is our ancestral land and part of the Sapta Sindhu region where our ancestors lived during the so-called where some of our ancestors lived during the so-called Harappan period. Yeah. So, they have discovered evidence of ancient dentistry that dates back around 9,000 years in the Sapta Sindhu and the Saraswati Sindhu region, which is temporarily part of Pakistan. Yeah. So, what's written here is that primitive dentists drilled nearly perfect holes into live but undoubtedly unhappy patients between 5500 BC and 7000 BC, and so on and so forth. Yeah, researchers carbon dated at least 9 skulls with 11 drill holes found in a graveyard in this region. They call it Pakistan, and so on. So yeah, here's an example of a tooth that was drilled, very very well drilled tooth, almost perfect holes and all that. And this is a reconstruction or recreation of what was done at the time by our ancestors. So we know that our ancestors from the so-called Harappan period knew how to perform dental surgery. Did they do this or without anesthesia? I mean, so that article assumes that it was done without anesthesia, but that's an assumption that has no basis in fact. We've had the ancient system of Ayurveda and all that, which was very advanced. It's possible that we had painkillers of various kinds that were used to maybe numb the part of the tooth, the part of the jaw locally, and provide some relief from the pain and so on. But yeah, that's beside the point. So yes, our ancestors from that time knew how to perform dental surgery. I am not sure about brain surgery. We know there was the ancient practice of trepanation that was performed by ancient peoples much before, much older than than our ancestors from the Harappan times. Yeah. Trepanation was when you drill a small circular hole into the brain of an individual, of a live individual. So sometimes what happens is that, there are cranial injuries, head injuries. Somebody falls down from a tree, for instance, or from a cliff. You are climbing to gather honey, and you fall from there. You fall 10 feet, 20 feet, or whatever. You bang your head, and what happens is that the brain swells up inside. There is pressure that builds up, and that can sometimes kill people. So one of the ways of relieving that is to drill a hole or something to relieve the pressure. So people, archaeologists have found many ancient skulls in various parts of the world with those trepanation sort of procedures visible in that, a hole that was drilled, and then you can see that the bone has healed around it, which means that the person lived and survived the procedure. I'm not sure if they have found that sort of thing in the Saraswati Sindhu region. Maybe they have. I have not come across it myself, as far as I can remember. But yes, I think that if ancient peoples, from the primitive hunter gatherer times, apparently were able to do it, then I'm sure that our ancestors in the Saraswati Sindhu region would have had better procedures for cranial surgery, possibly brain surgery. We don't have evidence as far as I know, but it is certainly possible. But we do have very clear evidence of dental surgery, proper dental surgery being performed, proper drilling of holes, very rapid drilling of holes, and good, precise holes being drilled into people's teeth about 9,000 years before today. Yeah. So that indicates that technology was advanced, I mean, to a certain degree, 9,000 years before today. So yeah, that tells you about the kind of lives our ancestors lived in this region all those years ago. So that's what I can tell you. Okay, Pujan says, you have talked about the sunken city of Dwarka before that is being found. Still, why don't we get much news, proper images, or documents about it? I heard that the ASI Archaeological Survey of India has stopped doing more research there. Shouldn't we study those ruins to get a better idea about our ancient India? I think we should study those ruins to get a better idea of ancient India. It's disappointing and it's perplexing that somebody like Graham Hancock, whom we just spoke about just a minute ago, someone like him, with the help of private funds, with the help of Netflix or whoever has helped him to make the movie, he has been able to go across the world to 7 or 8 ancient sites with high technology, with drones, with lidar, the technology that helps you peer under the ground and discern what kind of structures lie below the surface of the earth, several tens of meters below the earth. He has access to that technology. He has access to sonar technology that allows you to map the seabed, the ocean floor. So a private individual and a private filmmaking company with whatever producer he has was able to acquire all this technology and show so much detail in that TV series Ancient Apocalypse with just private funding. In the case of the ASI, they have the funding that comes from the government of India, one of the most powerful and richest governments in the world. And still, we have no idea of what lies below the surface of the ocean at Dwarka. No images have been released. Whatever images were released were from 20, 30 years ago. It is so disappointing that the ASI is not doing this. They have the funds. If they don't have the funds, publicize it. The government has the money. The government has the money to do this. I would like to see the ASI, or the first of all, the ASI is I've said this so many times. I think the ASI is incompetent. I'm sure there are some good archaeologists in the ASI. We know in the past there have been some really good archaeologists. Dr. S.R. Rao comes to mind, and obviously Dr. B.B. Lal, one of the greatest archaeologists the world has ever seen. Yes, two such very prominent people come to mind. So the ASI, I'm sure even today would have some good archaeologists, but overall it's a bunch of bureaucrats who run the show. Yeah, and we know what the ASI is doing. So many temples under its protection, they have been plundered. The idols have been stolen. They end up in Western auction houses. We can see online auctions of Saraswati Sindhu artifacts happening all over the world. Yes, there is a site called Vatican.com on which you can see it. I wonder where those artifacts are being plundered from. Some of them would be plundered from the Pakistani side of the Saraswati Sindhu region, but I expect some of them would be plundered from the Indian part as well, which would come under ASI protection. There are so many articles I can put on the screen that attest to the fact that ASI protected monuments are being plundered. The ASI is incompetent. I think the ASI should be disbanded, and the money should be reinvested into creating a professional organization run by professionals, not by bureaucrats, incompetent bureaucrats. So that's the first thing I would like to say. The ASI needs to be disbanded, and a new professional organization needs to be created, which is which has dedicated professional archaeologists who are dedicated to their work. And then we need to identify the sites that really need to be preserved and investigated, instead of renovating and protecting and embellishing Turkic monuments, the monuments that testify to the past millennium of humiliation of India. We should look into the sites like Dwarka, etc. There is an ancient city complex in the Gulf of Khambat. Not just one ancient archaeological site, but a whole cluster of archaeological sites under the ocean, 30-40 meters below the surface of the ocean, on the seabed. This complex, this archaeological complex is at least 9 to 11 to 12,000 years old. It's a cluster of ancient cities that our ancestors built. And what's being done there? Nothing. No investigation whatsoever. Why don't they use sonar to map the seabed and produce proper images of what the site looks like, those archaeological sites look like? Why don't we see new images, proper images of Dwarka, the entire layout of the ancient city? Nothing is being done. It is so frustrating. So yeah, if a private individual with limited access to money and funds like Graham Hancock can produce such a wonderful documentary, a very well produced documentary like Ancient Apocalypse, why can't the ASI or the government of India do something about these ancient sites and let the public know, let the people of India know, and the world know what lies below the ocean? What did the ancient city of Dwarka, the underwater submerged city of Dwarka, look like? What did it look like when it was above the ocean? Or at least show us the layout of the city, the architecture, and the map of the ancient city, and how it would perhaps have looked like, and the Gulf of Khambat archaeological complex. Why can't we do it? It's so frustrating. We have the funds, we have the money, we have an organization like the ASI. I just don't get it. Very frustrating. Okay, Roshni says, you have said that the Indian population doesn't have Neanderthal DNA, and that it is one of the things that disproves the Aryan invasion theory. I did a DNA test with 23andMe, and the results came back as 100% Indian, mostly North, and also that I have more Neanderthal DNA than 81% of 23andMe users. My dad has more than 91% of users. This is perplexing to me. Most users in 23andMe are of European origin, ancestry. Is there an alternative explanation to this? Okay, so what I had said, I did say that apparently the majority of the Indian population has almost no Neanderthal ancestry. This is something that Dr. Neeraj Rai had said. Now, the research is not out yet. So it's something that was said verbally. We still have to see the actual research paper, which has still not been published. So we are waiting for that to happen. Maybe this year, maybe next year, all that stuff will be published. We are waiting for it. Those are going to be very important papers. The paper about how much Neanderthal ancestry exists or does not exist within India, and the paper about the origin of the R1A haplogroup. These are very important works that are due to be published reasonably soon. Now, so Dr. Neeraj Rai has said this on multiple occasions, that Indians mostly don't have Neanderthal ancestry. Now, let's understand what that means. Most Indians have almost no Neanderthal ancestry or negligible Neanderthal ancestry. It doesn't mean that all Indians have zero Neanderthal ancestry. Indians are an enormous population, 1.3 billion people within present day India itself. If we put together the entire Indian subcontinent, it's more than it's more than how much? More than 1.7 billion Indians or individuals who are of Indian ancestry. That is an enormous population group. It is a substantial portion of all humanity. Now, you go back 2,000, 3,000 years, 5,000 years. So the Neanderthals went extinct around 30 to 20,000 years before today. And the easternmost evidence of Neanderthal, of them having lived somewhere, is in the Middle East and Israel. You go east, further east from that, you see no traces of Neanderthals ever having existed there. So that tells us that the Neanderthals did not go further east from the Middle East region, from Israel. They did not venture into, let's say, Iraq, Mesopotamia, or Iran, or the Indian subcontinent, right? Uh, and they seem to have died out maybe 30,000 years ago, or maybe about 22, 23,000 years before today. Roughly, let's say 20,000 years before today. Now, we know the out of Africa migration happened, and at some point in time, our ancestors, we know that the out of Africa migrants, which migrated out of Africa about 80 or 70,000 years before today, they went eastwards. They crossed map. We haven't opened the map yet. How can it be? Where's the map? Here is the map. I must show the map. I cannot have a session Ask Abhijit without showing the map. Finally, the map. So, most likely, the out of Africa migration happened over here. You see, Djibouti, across this strait, which is called the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. At some point in time, it was possible to cross this, or maybe they used boats or rafts or whatever. So they crossed over into the Arabian Peninsula. They went eastwards and northwards towards Muscat, present-day Muscat, towards present-day Dubai, and then they crossed over from here, the Strait of Hormuz, into what is now Iran, and then they went further eastwards into Balochistan, and then they entered the Indian subcontinent. That is what most likely happened. That's what genetics and other evidence also tells us. Yeah, and then from India, they eventually started expanding across Eurasia, east, north, west, everywhere. So India was the first out of Africa founder zone. And then as they went westwards, they encountered the Neanderthals. And then there was some intermixing. And as a result of that, most non-African humans have between 2 to 4 or 2 to 6% Neanderthal ancestry. It's like having one great grandparent or something who was Neanderthal, roughly like that, give or take. Now, so some portion of humanity, non-African humanity, has Neanderthal ancestry, and some doesn't. So those who stayed back in the Indian subcontinent at that point in time would have had no Neanderthal ancestry. Then the Neanderthals go extinct about 20,000 or so years ago. And then what you have is that you have all kinds of migrations. The story of humanity is the story of migrations. There have been lots of migrations out of India, into India, and so on and so forth. It's multiple pulses and waves of migrations back and forth, back and forth. The Indian subcontinent was the major founder zone. Most of humanity at some point in time lived, or most of the non-African humans at some point in time lived in the Indian subcontinent. And we know there were lots of migrations out of India. And then there was some back reaction as well. Like we say in physics, some people re-entered India at various points in time. We know that the Scythians were of Indian ancestry, and at some point in time, about 2,000 years ago, they re-entered India. They lived all across the Central Asia, Eurasia, even Eastern Europe. So they would have acquired Neanderthal ancestry. Then they re-entered India about 2,000 years ago. And I'm sure lots of people in northern and western India have some fractional Scythian ancestry. We know the Greeks also lived in northwest India. And I'm sure lots of people in northwest India, in western India, northern India would have a little bit, maybe 1%, 2% Greek ancestry as well. The Greeks, they lived all the way across in Europe. They would have had Neanderthal ancestry, and so on and so on and so forth. So there are lots of these small waves of migrations, back and forth migrations, that would bring in all kinds of mixed ancestry into India. Overall, if you see the India's genetics, they are very much Indian genetics, but there will be these minor components that have come from outside. So most likely the people who live in northern India, who have had more exposure to Scythian and Kushan and Greek ancestry compared to the people who live in eastern or southern India, maybe they would have more Neanderthal ancestry. I would not say that all of them would have it. So that's what I mean, right? So if you look at the Indian population as a whole, the entire 1.3 billion strong population of India, and then you do a statistical analysis and you see how much of percentage has Neanderthal ancestry, substantial Neanderthal ancestry, or non-trivial, non-negligible Neanderthal ancestry, you will see maybe 1% or 2% may have it. And Roshni, it may happen that you are one of those lucky few who have substantial Neanderthal ancestry. So that's how it happens. You have to look at it statistically, and then you have to look at it from an individual perspective. So statistically, when we talk about India, there appears to be, the paper has not been published yet, but whenever it is published, it will show you that statistically as a whole, the 1.3 billion strong Indian population seems to have very little Neanderthal ancestry. But individuals will always be exceptions. There will always be individuals who will differ from the average, right? So that is the explanation. That's the explanation. I don't know what sort of ancestry I have. If I do my 23andMe thing, who knows what it will throw up, and so on. So individuals can differ from the norm, but overall, statistically, it tells you a whole certain story about the statistical overall population of India. All right. Okay, Astra Games says, your views on Turks having 18% South Asian Indian DNA. I despise this fake made up term South Asia. Map. Where's the map? Take a look at the map of Asia. This is Asia. It's actually Eurasia. There's no actual distinction between Europe and Asia. But it's a Eurocentric term. So there is a continent called Eurasia. And what's south of Eurasia? I mean, how does India become South Asia? It makes no sense. If you're talking about the south of Asia, even Iran would be in the south of Asia. And I would say that Indonesia is even more south of Asia. So this term is a fake made up term. The correct term is Indian subcontinent. So what are my views on Turks having 18% Indian DNA or Indian subcontinental DNA? Is it because of slavery and intermixing with populations at the time of invasions in India, or what exactly it is? So I haven't seen any news report or any research that says that Turks have approximately 18% Indian DNA. But assuming you are right, what could be the explanation for that? So in case they have discovered that the people of Turkey, the Turkish people, have approximately 18% Indian DNA, I would not be surprised at all. To understand why, we have to look at the origin, the history, the story of the Turkish people, the Turkic people. So what is the story of the Turkic or Turkish people? The origin of the Turkic people is most likely in this region, which is roughly the region of Mongolia. That's where there was this ancient people called the Xiongnu, Siognu or something, whatever the spelling is, Sixionngnu, Xiongnu. These people, they emerged from here. They were the Chinese called them the Xiongnu, and later they were called the Huns, right? So the Huns are the most likely progenitors or origin of the Mongolian and the Turkic peoples. So these Xiongnu were a very, very warlike people. About 2,300 years ago, they emerged out of this region and they started rampaging across the world. Yeah. And it triggered off two big invasions into India. Firstly, the Scythian invasion and then the Kushan invasion. And the Scythians and Kushans, they harmoniously assimilated into the Indian population. Yes, they displaced the Greeks also. Later, you had these waves of Hunnic invasions. Hunnic attempts to invade India, starting around the Gupta period, about 1500, 1600 years before today. And the great emperor Skandagupta spent his entire life repulsing these Hunnic invasions. These invaders were called the Shweta Hunas, the white Huns. And these Huns were attempting to invade India at the same time that they were attempting to invade Rome, the Roman Empire as well. So they were a nomadic period people whose presence spanned the whole of Eurasia. Yeah. The Huns. Eventually, after the decline of the Gupta Empire, the Huns were able to make inroads into India, and they too became Indianized. They ruled over parts of India, northern India, etc. Gandhar, Afghanistan, present day temporarily Pakistan, and various parts of North India, even all the way up to Western India. The Gujarat, Rajasthan region as well. So you had Hunnic origin kings ruling these places, and they very rapidly became Indianized. They became entirely Indian. Yes, and then there was this Hindu Shahi dynasty in northern India, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, present day Pakistan, present day North India, and then there were the Kabul Shahis as well. These were Hunnic kings, Hunnic dynasties that ruled these regions. They were all either Hindu or Buddhist. The Kabul Shahis were Hindus, I believe, and they actually, for a significant period of time, repulsed Turkic attempts to invade India. These Turkic attempts were Islamic attempts, because these Huns, they later became the originators of the Turkic peoples, and the Turks eventually became Islamized over a period of time. That's a whole different story. I'll not go there, but you can look it up. So these Huns, these Hunnic kings, the Kabul Shahi, the Turk Shahi kings, who were Hunnic and Turkic in origin, they were Hindu Buddhist. It's the same thing, right? And they tried their best to safeguard India from the Turkic invasions, which were their fellow Turks who were Islamic in origin, who were Islamic in nature, character, in religion. Yeah. So so that is one interesting story. Now these Turks, the Turks who tried to invade India beginning about 1,000 years ago, they came from various parts of Central Asia. Now let's understand what Central Asia was. There are two major regions in Central Asia, which is the present day Xinjiang region of China, currently part of China for now, and the western part of Central Asia. So the Xinjiang part of China, which is currently part of China, was originally known as Uttara Kuru, and what is now Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, all that was at that time in the past known as Uttara Madra. These were Indian regions. They were Indian origin kings and dynasties and people who lived there. So the whole of Central Asia was essentially Indian in origin, in nature, in culture. You will still find ruins of ancient Hindu temples, and stupas and all kinds of things all across Central Asia, even in Armenia and so on. Yeah. So the Turks, they conquered all these regions. They would have indulged in the standard Turkic atrocities, but yes, they would also have intermingled with these people, and they would have acquired their genetics as well. So assuming they killed off all the males, and then they procreated with the women, which is standard practice for these people, then they would have acquired Indian DNA through that medium, through that means, whatever you want to call it. So it's not surprising that they would have a substantial percentage of Indian DNA. That is one way it could have happened. And then we know that the Turks then started trying to enter Anatolia, which was then a part of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. And eventually, after a certain period of time, they did succeed. They eventually took Constantinople, yes. And then this region became Turkey. It was always historically Greek or Byzantine, Eastern Roman, yes. And then the whole different story happened. And so that would explain their Central Asian origin, would explain why they would have approximately 18% or whatever percentage of Indian origin DNA. It is not surprising or perplexing at all. You would also find, if proper research is done, lots and lots of Indian origin, Indian DNA in the peoples of the Arabian part of the world, the Middle East, even Egypt, even Eastern Africa, and whatnot, a lot more. Once the research is done, you will find all of these truths tumbling out. And then there are different stories associated with each place as to how this Indian DNA introgressed into these populations. A whole different story. If you study the ancient history of Ethiopia, you will realize that Ethiopia was also once very much Indian. Then, yeah, it's a different story. It's a whole different story. All right, next. Akhand Bharat says, congrats on 5 Hunid. All right, thank you. How exactly is America and the West declining? What are the causes for it? And how will it affect India and the rest of the world? Will this decline of American hegemony be a net positive for the world? So, yeah, I do say all the time that the West is declining. So, why do I say this? What's the evidence that the West is declining? So, look, there are so many different ways in which this decline manifests itself. First of all, you we do see the rise of competing economies. We see the rise of competing powers, which was not there 20, 30 years ago. Yes, you are seeing these new power centers emerge. There is China, there's India. These are major economies that have risen over time. India is still rising. India is still not nowhere close to China. But yeah, we are seeing the rise of competing economies competing with the West and the US. And these are not just competing economies, these are competing powers. They're competing powers. China, India, Iran to some extent is still there. Yeah. And then you have the ongoing revival of Russia. Boris Yeltsin purposefully destroyed the Russian economy. Starting 20 years ago, Vladimir Putin set off a process of rebuilding the Russian economy and the nation overall. And now we can see the significant revival of Russia that's happening. So that is something we are seeing. And in parallel to all this, we are seeing a slowing down and decline of the US economy and the Western economy. We are seeing that happen. We are seeing that happen in front of our eyes. We also see that the Eastern world, is now becoming a hub of science and technology and innovation and entrepreneurship. It's happening. It's mostly in China, in various Eastern Asian nations, those so-called Asian tigers, and also now in India as well. Now that things are changing, so we see that the East is becoming a hub of all of this science, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, all that. The East now, you see, it's visible. The East has more energy and more optimism and more hope. You don't see that in the West. Yeah. And you also see the slow, gradual decline of Western technological and scientific primacy. There was a time when all the scientific advancements, all the technology, it all came from the West. Now it's not the case. Now it's not the case. We are seeing a decline in Western technological and scientific superiority and primacy. Then you have all these societal issues in the West. There is a declining TFR, total fertility rate. The birth rates, they are declining drastically in the West. And then you have the clear loss of cultural and moral and ethical anchors, which is obviously the prime example of that is the decline, the wholesale rejection of Christianity. Because see, the West for the past roughly 1500 or 1000 plus years has been Christian. It's a Christian civilization, if you want to call it a civilization, right? So the moral values, values that the West had until recently were Christian values. Now that is being destroyed. That's why the Christians are trying to now, convert the East. And that's why there are billions and billions of dollars being poured into India, for instance, for these purpose of conversion and all that. That's happening, as we know. So we are seeing, 30 years ago, when the Pope would visit some part of Europe or whatever, there will be thousands of people lining the streets. Yeah, the Pope would be treated as a huge celebrity and some figure worthy of incredible adulation. Today, the Pope goes somewhere, there's no one who comes out to greet him and to see his car go around the streets. You can see the decline of Christianity in the West. You see that. Then you also have the destruction of the family system, of family values. It's ongoing in the West. Very high divorce rates in the West. Single families rampant everywhere. Single families. You have so much rampant crime, gun violence, homelessness, child abuse. Good God. Yeah, you can see that. And then there is this new religion in the US called wokeism. Yeah, that's there. Then there's the decline of the education system, drastic lowering of standards in the education system, the rise of these made up degrees. I mean, if you have a degree in gender studies, what are you going to produce? If you acquire a degree, a college degree, a university degree, it should make you a productive member of society. You should be able to produce something that provides value to society. If you have a degree in gender studies or God knows what else, what do you produce? You produce nothing. So that's what's happening now. All these made up, fake, fictitious degrees that provide no value to society. Yes. And obviously there's the end of meritocracy in the West in education, which is something you're also seeing. You can go to social media and look it up, what's happening there in the education system. Yeah. And then there is the realization in the society in the West, that in some members of society, that the entire Western edifice is built upon plunder and slavery and genocide. And they are now realizing that the West has no claim to moral superiority over any other part of the world. So all of this is indicative of the very clear ongoing decline of the West. It's happening. These are the causes and these are the symptoms. It's all happening. How will it affect India and the rest of the world? It's driving this ongoing geopolitical realignment in which the East is rising. There is this new clamor for within all these nations to join the BRICS plus grouping. People are hedging their bets. Nations are hedging their bets, and nations no longer believe that they can rely upon the US to give them security, long-term security, and all that. The EU is beginning to realize what's happening, and so on. So it's going to lead possibly to a period of chaos, to a period of a lot of instability in the world, maybe a period of war, and God knows what. We still don't know. I don't know what the future is going to be like, but it looks like there is an ongoing polarization of the world, an ongoing realignment of the world order, an ongoing bifurcation of the global system. On the one hand, you have the old, obsolete, so-called rules-based world order. On the other hand, we have this new grouping that's emerging, very powerful grouping, not yet very powerful, but it's a very influential grouping already, BRICS plus, which is the core group of countries is India, Russia, China. Yeah, Iran wants to join. The Saudis want to join. If Iran and Saudi join, then it's going to be a big deal, and so on. So we are witnessing this ongoing realignment of the world, the bifurcation of the global order, and so much more. So this decline of the American hegemony, I think, um, overall it will be a net positive for the world if there is an alternative leader that emerges, and a leader who is not hegemonic and imperialistic and oppressive and rapacious like the Anglo-Saxons have been. The past 400-500 years, the Anglo-Saxons have ruled the world. It's just one empire. It was a British empire, then it's the American empire. Now these are two manifestations of the same entity, of the same thing, the same force, the Anglo-Saxon empire. It's ruled the world for the past 500 years, and it's been terrible for the world. It's destroyed the world. It has siphoned off the world's wealth and placed it in the hands of the West, and it's destroyed the rest of the world. It's been very bad for civilization and for the world and for humanity. So if a different kind of leadership emerges, then it will be good for the world. But if you have the rise of China, for instance, which has the same kind of imperial ambitions, then nothing much will change. Nothing much will change. Overall, it'll still go the same way. But if something like if a nation like India manages somehow to emerge as the leader, then maybe things will change. But first, India will have to change itself, because right now India is itself not ruled well. You know what the problems in India are. Yeah. So yeah, that's the deal. That's the deal. Abhay says it's been more than a month since Mr. Rishi Sunak became the president of the UK. It's a very short period of time, but what do you think of him as the president? I think Mr. Rishi Sunak, yeah, he has been president of the UK for a week. Well, see, as the president of the UK, you are actually not very important. Whether you are the president of the UK, see, if he is if the UK's leader, president, like you say, is an insignificant person, there is he or she doesn't really hold any real power. The UK is a vassal state of the US. The real power lies in the US. Whoever becomes president of the UK just does what he or she is told, like a good boy or good girl. And so, as you can see, Mr. Rishi Sunak, as in his capacity as president of the UK, has been going to the G20 summit. He was very happy there. You can see he's smiling and beaming. He also made his way to Ukraine, where he met the great actor, Mr. Zelensky. Yeah, and he met Mr. Macron and all that. So he's getting used to being a world leader and all that, but he's a leader only in name. The president of the UK is not is not someone who holds the real power. The real power resides somewhere far away, somewhere across the pond, like they say, across the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah. So the real power lies if more in Washington. If you're the prime minister of the US, then you may have more power. The president of the UK doesn't have so much power. So overall, I don't care about Mr. Rishi Sunak. Maybe a good guy. I think overall it's better him than somebody else from our perspective. At least it's an Indian origin person, but it doesn't really matter much. It makes lots of Indians happy. Good for them. Enjoy it. I'm not sure how long he will last as the president of the UK. As long as the prime minister of the US wants him to last, I assume. So yeah, that's what I can say about this matter. Next question. The next question, I wait for it to come. Sorry, where is it? Here it is. Mazar Chachar says, why does hunger persist in the world today despite the fact that humans have achieved so much of prosperity over the decades? What are the ways to eradicate hunger? Do you think hunger can be eliminated from the world through philanthropy? We already have the means and the money and the resources to eradicate all world hunger. There is so much wealth and prosperity in the West. Yeah. They have the money, they have the resources to immediately, within a week, eradicate all world hunger. They don't want to, because they stay rich at the expense of the rest of the world, at the expense of the so-called global south or the third world, especially Africa. You know what the British did in India? How did they engineer these artificial famines? We had so much incredibly fertile land in India, like we do still do, yeah. But they forced the Indian farmers to grow cash crops instead of food crops. So they forced Indian farmers to grow indigo, for instance, or they forced Indian farmers to grow opium or something else, but not food crops. And then and obviously there would still be food that would be cultivated, but that would be shipped off somewhere else, and so on. So the British engineered these artificial famines in India. Right now, in Africa, there is so much coffee being planted, being cultivated. Coffee is being cultivated, and things like that, and various other luxury crops are being cultivated for European consumption. If the African leaders were to refuse and say that we will not cultivate these crops anymore, we will cultivate, let's say, wheat or rice or whatever else, then those African leaders will be deposed. There will be a color revolution and they'll be bumped off. And then another pliable leader will be installed, and then the same thing continues. That's how they deliberately keep Africa dirt poor. That's what the West is doing. This poverty that you see in Africa and certain other nations, it is artificially induced poverty. Africa is still almost entirely colonized even today. What the East India Company and the British Raj were doing in India the past 300 years, you're still seeing the very same things happening in Africa today. That's why there is so much destitution and poverty and hunger in Africa. You see, that's what's happening. It can all be eliminated. The Europeans need to get out of Africa, stop interfering in the internal affairs of African nations. Let them resolve their differences and go on with their lives on their own without external interference. But that won't happen, right? That's what's happening. Most African nations have corrupt dictators ruling them. These corrupt dictators are allowed to rule despite, the West talks about democracy and human rights. They have all these world indices and all that. And yet they tolerate this. They don't tolerate it. They ensure there is no democracy in Africa. They ensure there are corrupt dictators ruling African nations, so that because they benefit from this. That's the reason why there is so much suffering and hunger and poverty and destitution in the world. It is all being engineered actively as we speak right now by various Western powers. That's what's happening. Okay, Mona Lisa says, Um, what's the agreement with the USA regarding ISRO, and why did we do it? Do we have any agreement with the USA vis-a-vis ISRO? See, I'm not sure if we have any specific one agreement with US about regarding ISRO. I think India and the US, or ISRO and NASA, for instance, have had this history of ongoing cooperation and collaboration in a variety of ways. For instance, we all know about Mangalyaan, Chandrayaan, etc. The first Chandrayaan mission was launched, I think, in 2008 or something. Yes, Chandrayaan 1, and it was a successful mission. The satellite, the spacecraft was in orbit around the moon. It did a lot of good work. It's still around there, but it's dead now. It's run out of power. So on Chandrayaan 1, we had, I believe, two American instruments. The Moon Mineralogy Mapper was one, and the other was a miniature synthetic aperture radar. So two instruments came from NASA. They were installed on Chandrayaan 1. And the other thing was that Chandrayaan 1 had this instrument called the Moon Impact Probe, which was an impactor which went and slammed into the moon's surface around the South Pole region, I believe, of the moon. And then there was another NASA satellite that picked up, and no, I think it was Chandrayaan itself, which then analyzed the cloud of debris that came out of the impact. When this impactor hit the moon, slammed into the moon at high velocity, it threw off this huge plume of debris, boom, like that. And then Chandrayaan, what it did was it analyzed the debris, and it discovered there is water in that debris. And that was the first confirmation that there is water on the moon. It was done by Chandrayaan 1, and there was NASA involvement in that. So that's one example. And when it comes to Chandrayaan 2, which was launched in 2019, I think, it was a partial success. The lander did not work. It it crashed onto the moon surface at the very last moment. It went upside down. I will, yeah. So on that too, there was, I believe, a laser retro reflector which was provided by the Americans. Yeah, it's a device that reflects light back to its source with very little scattering. So if you are sitting on Earth and you are aiming at that instrument on the moon with a laser beam, then within, I think, 2 or 3 seconds, the laser beam comes back to you, and you can uh, do various tests using that. Yeah, so that laser retro reflector was also provided by the Americans. So there is this history of ongoing cooperation between America and India in the space program. India is not yet a huge competitor to the US, so they are happy to collaborate in a variety of ways. If India becomes a major space power, like it has the potential to be, then maybe so much cooperation may not happen, or maybe it will. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, so that's what it is. So I'm not aware of any single or specific agreement between India and the US regarding ISRO, but there is a history, a long history of ongoing cooperation and collaboration between ISRO and NASA and India and the US in the field of space exploration. Yeah. Karthik says, if we cannot see what is outside the observable universe, how did the James Webb Space Telescope capture the first galaxies after the Big Bang? It's because the first galaxies that emerged after the Big Bang are part of the observable universe. They are not outside the observable universe. See, you see this ball here? Think of it as the observable universe. We are at the center. We are at the very center of it. And after the Big Bang, very, very soon after the Big Bang, uh, the universe was about this size. After the, very, very soon after the Big Bang, less than a second after the Big Bang. And then it expanded over time and so on. And after about 200 or so million years after the Big Bang, the first galaxies emerged. And these were inside the universe, not outside the universe. They are all part of the observable universe. And because they are part of the observable universe, that's why the James Webb Space Telescope has succeeded in capturing the photons, the infrared light that came out of those galaxies, all those 13 point whatever million years ago, 13.6 or so billion years before today. and that's how the JWST has been able to capture the light from there. So it was, these galaxies were part of the observable universe. They are inside the observable universe, not outside. That's why it is so. Very interesting science that's coming out of the JWST, and many challenges they're facing, micro meteoroid impacts and whatnot. But overall, it's doing well, and it's in the process of revolutionizing our understanding of the universe. So yeah, great work being done there. Okay, Daniel Nicholson says, ours being a three-dimensional world, we perceive length, breadth, height. The fourth dimension being time, not space time, time. How many dimensions do we altogether have? And with our present brain capacities, could we ever imagine of understanding and feeling all those dimensions? So yes, the world that we see, we perceive it as being a three-dimensional world: length, breadth, height, three dimensions. And then there is this mysterious thing called time, which in the framework of general relativity is the fourth dimension. So in general relativity, we inhabit a four-dimensional universe: space time. And within space-time, we have these various phenomena that happen. Space-time is the stage upon which we dance, upon which the universe dances. Yeah, and the curvature of space-time is perceived as what we perceive as the force of gravity. The and so on and so forth. Yeah, the curvature of space-time is what we perceive as gravity. So according to general relativity, there are four dimensions. According to our experienced world, we have three dimensions, but time is there. Yeah. Now, according to Kaluza-Klein theory, which came out 100 years ago or so, uh, they did calculations in five dimensions. They introduced an extra dimension, and that threw out some interesting results. According to one version of string theory, there are 10 dimensions. According to another version of string theory, there are 11 dimensions. According to bosonic string theory, there are 26 dimensions. We have never found those dimensions. Yeah. And recently, Dr. Subhash Tak, who was on this channel, on the Abhijit Chavda podcast just a couple of weeks ago, he has been doing very interesting work in the past 2.5 years. And he has demonstrated that the optimal number of dimensions in the universe is not two or three or four or whatever, it is E. E is called Euler's number. Look up what E is. It is an irrational number, less than three, but not quite two. Yeah. So the universe has E dimensions. And that actually kind of resolves many of the problems and contradictions in physics. So we don't quite know for sure, but it's quite possible the universe has E dimensions. Not three, not four, not 10, not 11, not 26, but E dimensions. That would be weird, right? But yeah, the world is weird. And that seems to resolve many of the paradoxes, like the Hubble tension, like what is the nature of gravity, and why gravity has had different strengths at different epochs of the universe's history. It also kind of throws light upon the mysteries of dark matter and dark energy and so on. Very interesting research Dr. Kak is doing. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what's happening, and very interesting work. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I can say about this. But what about brain capacity and all that? So imagine there are more than three or four dimensions. Let's say there are 10 dimensions. So one of the things that's been theorized is that these dimensions are ultra microscopic dimensions and curled up. So only if you go into the quantum domain will you be able to perceive those extra dimensions. Otherwise, you will not be able to perceive them and all that, and so on. So yeah, it's all theoretical. There is no evidence for that, but that's how they have been able to make string theory work mathematically by introducing extra dimensions. We're not sure if they actually exist. Possibly there are not 10 dimensions, there are E dimensions possibly. So it's all still a work in progress, but very interesting work being done by Dr. Kak right now. Very important and very interesting work. All right, let's take some more questions. A few questions here and there. Pranav says, which books to read to understand power? Well, typically, I don't do book recommendations because there are so many caveats you have to give, especially when it comes to books about history. But if you want to talk about books about power, I can give you a couple of recommendations. So let me put. Let's do a Google search, shall we? Let's do a Google search. Let me give you two book recommendations. One is 48 Rules of Power by Brian Greene. This is an interesting book. I haven't read it for more than 15 years, I would say. But yeah, it's a very interesting book. It's about personal power. Yeah, about it's a very what they would call a Machiavellian book. How to manipulate people and how to acquire more power at the expense of others and so on, like a zero sum game. At times it's like that and so on. It's an interesting book. It's called The 48 Rules of Power by Brian Greene. That's one possible recommendation. The other is the Dictator's Handbook. The Dictator's Handbook. Uh, why is there a backslash there? There you go. So this book is by two authors. One is Alistair Smith, and the other is Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. This is an interesting book as well. This is about political power. It's about more large scale power structures and all that. So here are two book recommendations about power. One is Brian Greene. One is this other one, The Dictator's Handbook. Both are interesting books, and there are so many more. But yeah, you want to start off with these two possibly and see how it goes for you, whether you like them, whether you can make sense of them or not. Interesting books about power. Okay, let's take one more question. Samarth says, would you like to see your predictions about Twitter becoming $1 trillion company go wrong and instead witness coup replacing Twitter worldwide? Which other competitors do you see rising alongside with coup? So coup is a Twitter knockoff. It's an Indian social media platform. I think I have a coup account. I had made it about 2 or 3 years ago. At that time, I used coup for just a while and then I gave up on it. It was very buggy, extremely poor user experience, not fun to use at all. It used to crash and it was not fun to use. Twitter was so much easier to use. So I have a coup account. I haven't used it in close to 2 years. Hopefully, it's better now. I hear that the Brazilians have adopted coup. Lots of Brazilians have moved to coup and so on. So if it is so good, but I would say that, I hope coup does well, or any other Indian social media startup. We need to have our own platforms and competitors. Nothing would make me happier than seeing my prediction go wrong and an Indian platform emerging and becoming a major competitor to Twitter. Nothing would make me happier. So I made that prediction based on the logic. I mean, based on logic, that yeah, it looks like once Elon Musk takes over, he knows how to take a company to the next level, multiple levels, and he knows how to make money. He knows how to succeed. So based on his track record, it's quite likely, it's quite possible that he may end up turning Twitter into $1 trillion company within the next 2 to 5 years. It's very possible. Let's see if it happens or not. But yeah, I would be happy if an Indian social media platform were to become a major competitor to Twitter. Right now, I think Coup is very far away from being that. I hope the user experience is better now on Coup. But the thing about Twitter is that it's the global uh, meeting place. You can interact with people from all across the world. Within 5 minutes, you can take a pulse of what's happening across the world or in a certain country. What's the sentiment, the mood of the people over there? Right now, you can go to Twitter and immediately see what's happening in sport, let's say, or in politics, or in India, or in the US. What are the Americans talking about? You don't see that much in Coup because the whole world hasn't adopted Coup yet. So I think that whoever is running Coup or whatever else needs to be innovative. Don't just create a knockoff, just a clone of what Twitter is, but show be innovative, add extra features, something that others don't have, and so on. And maybe that could be more interesting and make things really work and really differentiate it from the existing products. Yeah, so that's what I could say about this. um what else? Let's take a question from Swapnil. Africa is building a great green wall across the Sahel region from Senegal to Djibouti to hold back the advancing Sahara Desert. Will it succeed in making the region lush green and habitable again? What is the Sahel region? Let's take a look at the map. Once again, we have the map on the screen. Where it is? Where is it? Here it is. The Sahel region is the region between, it's essentially the white part, the transition zone between the Sahara Desert and the remainder of Africa. So several African nations are planning to build a great green wall in this region. Artificial reforestation or afforestation to check the advance of the Sahara Desert. Will they succeed? It's very possible that they succeed. See, the advance of a desert is a result of natural or whatever climate change. Now, climate change is a slow, gradual, creeping process, but human interventions can move much faster than the pace at which climate change moves. So it is definitely possible, if all these various nations come together and act in unison, that they will be able to possibly in the next 10 or 20 years genuinely create this entire belt of forest, which could very much end up stopping the advance of the Sahara Desert. And once you create an artificial forest, the entire climate changes in the region, because forests reduce the temperature. You know, wherever you have a forest, the temperature drops several degrees, maybe 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, even depending on the size of the forest. So if you create an artificial forest, you're going to create a zone in Africa where the temperature is lower, which would bring in rain, which would then expand the forest. So it could end up, properly checking the advance of the Sahara Desert. So it is entirely possible that these nations could succeed if they act in unison, act properly. It's entirely possible they could do it in the next 20 or so years. Very much possible. Maybe even 10 years. Right. Okay, I still have lots of other questions, but let me take some questions from the live chat. So, in case you all have questions for me in the live chat, please go ahead and ask me, and I shall take a few. Elon. Yes, Elon is the name. Ellen? Well, maybe. All right. Do we have questions for me? And I shall take some. Can you explain about the Crusades? Well, I would have to take a few hours to explain what happened there, the Crusades. But to explain in a nutshell, this was the attempt by European powers to expand their hegemony, they expand their sphere of influence into the Middle East. So the Middle East was at the time ruled by the Arabs, by the Muslims, yes, uh, and the Christians called that region, the where today you have Israel. They called it the Holy Land, the birthplace of Jesus Christ, apparently, and all that. So they wanted to reclaim it and bring it under Christian rule again, and that's what it was all about. So various kings and rulers of Europe, under the banner of the Vatican, of the Roman Catholic Church, they made these various incursions into this region, multiple campaigns, which were called the Crusades. At some point in the time, it succeeded, and eventually it was defeated by Salahuddin Ayyubi. So that is in very brief about the Crusades. Maybe I could take it up in the future and give a deeper, more detailed explanation. I have absolutely heard of no evidence that our head is older than the feet. I, I have absolutely no idea about this. How is the head older than the feet? In which way? So yeah, so I'm sorry, I may be ignorant, okay, and I may not know about it. I don't know everything in the world. There are things that I do not know about. So maybe, but I have personally never ever come across a claim that the head is older than the feet, even slightly. I never heard of it. Sorry. Uh-huh. Okay, Somnath says, what is Project Kali by DRDO? What's the future of directed energy weapons in India? So this is a story that keeps cropping up, but DRDO has never made any pronouncements, any announcement of any such thing. Yeah, DRDO, Kali, Project Kali. So people speculate about this, that maybe it's some incredibly powerful world-ending weapon that will. I don't know what it is. Yeah, it seems to have been in the early 2000s some kind of directed energy weapons program or some kind of experiment, that the kilo ampere linear injector or something. I don't know what it was. Kilo ampere is a very, very, very tiny, small amount of energy. Yeah, kilo ampere, very small, very small. So I don't know if it has evolved or morphed into something major. I have no idea. DRDO has made no announcements and made publicized nothing. So the answer is I don't know. It's for DRDO, if they wish, if they choose to do so, to announce whether something is being done, whether this project still exists, or maybe they should not, if it is something that's sensitive and something that is important for India's national security. In that case, they should not announce it. So the answer from my perspective is I don't know, because the government has announced nothing. DRDO has announced nothing for the past 15 years, as far as I know. What's the future of directed energy weapons in India? I hope the future is good. What's a directed energy weapon? Essentially, think of a laser. A laser is this pointer that we have, which throws this collimated beam of light, uh, which doesn't diverge in that manner. That's what a laser is. And if you pump in enough energy into that light, it can poke holes through solid surfaces. So that's a directed energy weapon. So today what you have is that, in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, you had this James Bond movies in which you had lasers that could, you know uh, cut through metal sheets and all that. So that was the promise that lasers held. And today I believe such lasers do exist, and such lasers do have military applications. So imagine there's a plane flying in the air, and you shoot a laser at it. So it will poke a hole through the aircraft, and it'll crash it. Or there's a missile that's coming in, and instead of shooting a missile to intercept that missile, you just fire a laser at it, and it will destroy the missile in mid-air. Imagine there's a ballistic missile coming in at Mach 23 speed, and yet if you have a laser, you can take it out. So there is a lot of potential, military usage potential, that lasers and directed energy weapons have. I am not sure what the status is in India of the research and development of such weapons. I hope it is being done, maybe in DRDO, maybe somewhere else, but no such announcements have been made. So once again, I don't know, but the potential is there. So hopefully this work is being done, and hopefully there is a good future for that. Right. Okay. Let's take one more question if there is something interesting that I can take up. What is it? Where is it? Where is it? Do we have anything interesting? You've said that multipolarity is good, but I agree. But won't there be multiple wars in the world due to this? Well, if you have multipolarity and everybody wants to kill each other, fight each other, then there'll be multiple wars. Even in unipolarity, you have seen wars, but you don't hear about them, or maybe you choose not to look at them. How many wars has the world seen during the unipolar and bipolar phase? Go and look up a list of US interventions in the world. There's a whole laundry list of wars that they've caused. War has always been a part of humanity, whether it's a unipolar world or a bipolar world or a multipolar world or whatever it is. Wars have been around, so there's nothing you can do about it. So you cannot say that there'll be more wars because the world will become multipolar. No, wars have always been around. There are wars happening right now as we speak. We still don't have a multipolar world right now. We still have a mostly unipolar world right now as we speak, and still there are wars going on. There is Yemen going on. There is Ukraine going on. There are conflicts in Africa that you have not heard about. There is the Eritrea, Ethiopia thing going on. There is the Darfur situation in Sudan. There is so much more happening that you are not aware of. Wars have always been there. So I don't agree that multipolarity will cause an upsurge in the number of conflicts in the world. I don't think so. Okay. Okay, I hope that answer makes sense. uh, Shaheen is right. The history of mankind is the history of warfare. Unfortunately, that is the truth. Yeah. All right. Do we have anything else? So many questions. I'm sure I'll be missing lots of them. Couldn't the US be using Saudi Arabia to get into BRICS and get some inner information out of by means of Saudi? Yeah, if they are children, they would do it, but that's not how it works. You can get inner information through a variety of means. You don't need to put Saudi Arabia into BRICS for that. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, I don't know. Are we in Kali Yuga? Yes, we are in Kali Yuga. It's great fun, isn't it? Uh, do we have any other interesting questions? I have no idea about the Kalpa Vigraha idol. Okay, I have no idea about it. Sorry. Some people say it's 39 million years old. Some people say it's 27 million thousand years old. An idol, a statue made of metal cannot be dated. How do you date a statue made of metal? You can carbon date something if it has organic substances. Metal is an inorganic substance. How do you date that? So if you have a metallic object, how does anybody decide that it's so many years old? So I see these claims being made that it's 27,000 or 23,000 or 37,000 years old or something. I have no idea what is the factual basis on which these claims are made. And I have not seen any research paper or any genuine research about what this idol is, this statue is, and where it's come from or whatever. I see blog posts and various other claims made on social media and various other things which cannot be relied upon. Where's the primary evidence? Where's the primary sources of where it's come? So I have no idea because I've never been able to find any actual substantive research or study or evidence of what this thing is. So my answer is I have no idea as to what this is. Share my favorite books. Too many to share. And it would take a long time. Okay. हिंदी चैनल बनाइए सर. मेरा एक हिंदी चैनल है लेकिन मैं उसके ऊपर इतना एक्टिव नहीं हूं क्योंकि मेरी हिंदी इतनी अच्छी नहीं है. वैसे मेरी हिंदी बहुत अच्छी है लेकिन मैं इतना कंफर्टेबल नहीं हूं हिंदी में बात करने में व्हेन इट कम्स टू टेक्निकल सब्जेक्ट्स, टेक्निकल मैटर्स एंड स्कॉलरली मैटर्स, क्योंकि because my entire study, my entire education, all of that has been in English. That's called mental colonization. Maybe in the future, maybe next year, I may become more active on the Hindi channel. Maybe I will do that. I hope to do that. I will have to put some things in place for that. But yes, that is on my to-do list to become active on a regular basis on the Hindi channel. Hopefully next year, hopefully very soon. All right, I think we are at the end of today's session. So thank you so much, all of you, once again, for participating, for asking all these questions. I apologize to all of you, to the hundreds and thousands of you who have asked me questions. I've not been able to take them. I always try to take as many as possible and the best possible questions, and I will keep on doing this. But for now, we are at the end of today's session. So thank you so much, everybody, once again. Very grateful. I will see you very soon in the next live stream. Until then, take care and see you. Bye. Good night, good day. See you later.